Welcome back to Bradley Jay Travel. Today it's Israel, and we'll spend time in Jerusalem's Old City, talk to a hairdresser who describes missiles flying overhead. We'll see a Hezbollah guard tower on the Lebanese border, and we'll get a report from the Syrian border. It's natural to start in Tel Aviv. That's where most trips to Israel start. Had a wonderful flight, and in the line to get through customs and passport control, I met a guy. I was just standing beside him in line, started chatting with him, found out where his hotel was going to be. I checked out his hotel, didn't like it, and found my own nearby. But I hung around with him some that night, which is great. It's great to have kind of a friend in a new place. It can be kind of daunting arriving at a new and strange city with no place to stay, but I prefer the freedom to the security. If I'd met a guy who was going to Jerusalem, I'd like the freedom to go to Jerusalem and stay there and maybe hang around with that guy. The way this will work is if there are images that need description, I'll describe them while you see them. If there are images that don't, then I will tell stories as they run. Now, Tel Aviv's a really cool city and a great place to be, but I'm drawn to Jerusalem and the history therein. I'm also drawn to the juxtaposition of cultures and religion, which is evident from this footage here. Somehow they make it work. Somehow they get along. Take a look at this footage coming up of the kids playing football or soccer. If the ball happens to go down that alleyway there, which I saw it do, the ball ends up in the Islamic Quarter, and the kids have to go get it. They make it all work. Now here's the famed Western Wall, or Wailing Wall. It's definitely worth getting a guide in Jerusalem. If you do, you'll find things out about what you're seeing that you would never otherwise find out. Before I left for Jerusalem and Israel, I went online to make connections and find people to talk to. Well, I found Dave Silverman, a hairdresser who moved to Jerusalem, and boy, he has an interesting story.
I arrived in Israel in October of '74, and on a thing called the kibbutz. It's a communal farm, and they stuck me in cotton the second day of after I arrived, and I was working in the cotton in those days. Nowadays the cotton is all compressed into these big cubes, but in those days they didn't have compressors. They had the volunteers jump from on top of a cage onto the cotton to stomp the cotton down, and that's where cotton stomping comes from. And who was I stomping cotton with? I was these beautiful girls from Finland and Sweden. I thought my parents sent me to heaven. I just couldn't believe it. I mean, I was in the sunshine, palm trees, cotton, sitting by the pool every afternoon, eating good food, getting in shape. And that's how I originally fell in love with Israel.
And so you came here and you even joined the army. What was your experience in the army like?
The army was sort of caught me off guard. I had to do it as a citizen. Once I became a citizen, I had to join the army within a year. It sort of freaked me out, but I was ready for it. By then I was already Zionistic. I had ideology, and I loved the country, and I want to help protect the country and protect my friends in various parts of the country. And fighting in Lebanon in '78 sort of freaked me out. I saw death for the first time right before my eyes from war. And then during the '80s, I was in the first Lebanon war, where also I saw a lot of death. I was a medic in the tanks. So I saw a lot of bad burn wounds and injuries that sort of freaked me out to the point where I was having nightmares, and I left the country in '85. I needed a break from the war and all the heavy scenes. And my wife at the time, she and I went back to Boston for 7 years.
And then you came back?
I came back. I was homesick the whole time. I stuck behind in Boston. I had a brother who was very ill, who passed away. And I came back to Israel and took off where I left off. That's what I want to use.
Now tell me about the challenges and the rewards of living here.
The rewards are that I've got a great climate, nothing like a beautiful climate, and I love the people, I love the food, I love the culture, I love religion, I love everything about it, this country.
It seems like you have a sense of purpose here that is lacking with a lot of folks in the States, and you have a bond here. Can you talk about that and why that exists?
Well, pretty much it's living has a meaning to it. Your friends become your family. We're all one big family here. Being all Jewish, it pulls us all together. Being surrounded by people who want to kill you all the time and take over your land, it's a bit of a challenge, but it's a challenge. I love it.
Now, more about the challenges. You told me a story earlier about seeing missiles fly over your house and then seeing the Iron Dome blow them up.
Yeah, that was pretty amazing. I mean, thank God for modern technology. I'd be sitting there on a Saturday morning having coffee in my patio with my wife and kids and seeing missiles flying over our head last summer that were heading towards Jerusalem that weren't being knocked down because the computer knew that they were going to land in open areas. And a couple that we saw actually shot down right before our eyes. You see the missiles go up, one or two of them, and they explode, and like right over your head. It's like, well, thank God for the Iron Dome.
It's one thing to hear about those experiences in the news, quite another to hear about them in the first person. Now let's dive back into the old city of Jerusalem. There's a lot packed into about 1/3 of a square mile. There's the Armenian quarter, the Christian quarter, the Muslim quarter, and the Jewish quarter, all packed very tightly together. The quarters are connected by short alleyways, sometimes as short as, 30, 40, 50 feet. And if you like history, the old city of Jerusalem is hard to beat. As far as modern history goes, back in 1948, the Jordanians captured the old city of Jerusalem. And then back in 1967, the Israelis got it back, and there was actually hand-to-hand combat on the Temple Mount. Going way back, there's evidence that the city was settled back in the Bronze Age. Then you have your Israelite period, and according to the Bible, before King David's conquest of Jerusalem, in the 11th century BCE, the city was home to people called the Jebusites, and the Bible talks about Jerusalem as being heavily fortified and having a city wall, which is something borne out by archaeology. Then the First Temple period ended about 586 BCE. That's when Nebuchadnezzar's empire conquered Jerusalem and trashed Solomon's temple and the city. Then shortly after that, you had Persian King Cyrus the Great invited the Jews of Babylon to come on back to Judah to rebuild the temple. And the construction of the new temple was completed in 516 during Darius the Great, and that was about 70 years after the destruction of the first temple. The city was rebuilt, but it was rebuilt on a smaller scale, about 440 BCE. And then the Romans destroyed the whole thing in 70 CE. There are layers and layers of history. You have your late Roman period, your Byzantine period, your early Muslim period. Then you get into the Crusades. In 1099, Jerusalem was captured by the Western Christian army of the First Crusade, and they hung on to it until the Muslims and Saladin got it back in 1187. Some of my favorite features of the old city are the gates. Each gate has its own history. There's the Golden Gate, which was sealed up in 1541, but you can see it there. In Arabic, it's also known as the Gate of Eternal Life, and that was built in the 6th century. Then you have the Damascus Gate, which was built in 1537, so that was probably built by the Turks. Some other gates you can visit include Herod's Gate, the Dung Gate, Lion's Gate, Jaffa Gate, or Jaffa Gate, Zion Gate, and the New Gate, which is built in 1887, so it's not that new. Let's tell the story of the Golden Gate. The Golden Gate has different significance for different groups. For the Christians, they believe that this is where Mary's parents met after the Annunciation, so it's a big symbol of the virgin birth. So very important to many Muslims because they believe that this is the site of Allah's final judgment. I think the most interesting thing is, why was the gate sealed at all? Now, the sealing of the gate was completed by Suleiman, and they say he did it as a defensive move because the Jewish literature says the gate is said to be the point at which the Jewish Messiah will enter the city of Jerusalem, and therefore, since Suleiman did not want that to happen, he sealed up the gate. But to tell you the truth, I just can't see a Messiah being stumped by a gate being sealed up, but whatever. A real cool thing to do is to visit each of the gates, spend time there, and learn the history of each gate. I know that these alleyways look wild and busy and loud and cacophonous, but it's not always that way. There are lots of pockets and lots of alleyways, like here, that are really peaceful. And if you go early in the morning, then it's not very loud at all. There are lots of trinkets to buy in the old city, but I recommend that you buy none of them. Spend your money on good food and good experiences. One of those experiences would be the hiring of a guide. If you get a good guide, then do your research. If you get a good guide, it's absolutely worth it. Actually, I recommend getting two guides, one with a Muslim background and one with a Jewish background, so you can get different points of view. A lot of folks ask me, hey Bradley Jay, was the language a problem? And that's something that never even occurs to me, the language being a problem. If you ask somebody a question in English and they don't understand, they'll say, I don't speak English, or they'll let you know. Then you ask someone else. I don't mind asking a number of people because it's a way to interact. And if you really want to enhance the chances that the person you ask speaks English, choose someone young, because a lot of older folks never got around to learning English, but a lot of younger folks did. And now, we cover the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. If you happen to be Christian, then this is it for you. Even if you're not active in your religion, this place will probably have an impact. This building dates back to the 4th century, and it contains two very holy sites. There's Golgotha, which is the site that Jesus is believed to have been crucified, and Jesus' empty tomb as well. The last 4 stations of the cross are actually in this church. Now let's get into some deep history. Following the siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD, which I believe I told you about, Jerusalem had been reduced to ruins. Hadrian, the Roman emperor, began building a Roman colony here, and in 135 he ordered that a cave containing a rock-cut tomb be filled to create a foundation for a temple dedicated to Jupiter. Now that temple hung around till the very early years of the 4th century, and then, after seeing a vision of a cross in the sky in the year 312, and this is big, Constantine the Great converted to Christianity. He signed an edict called the Edict of Milan, legalizing the religion, and he sent his mother, Helena, to Jerusalem to look for Christ's tomb, which you can do when you're Constantine the Great. With the help of a couple of bishops, they found 3 crosses, one of which is alleged to be able to cure people of death, and they assumed that that was the true cross, the cross Jesus Christ was crucified on. As a result, Constantine ordered that the temple to Jupiter be replaced by a church. This church. Now let's head out to the Kidron Valley. This is the valley between the Temple Mount and the Mount of Olives, and there's a lot going on here historically. In the Hebrew Bible, this is the valley where King Jehoshaphat is thought to have overthrown the enemies of Israel. King David fled through this valley during the rebellion of Absalom. In the book of Joel, there's a mention that God will assemble all nations in the valley of Jehoshaphat, which is this valley. And according to the New Testament, Jesus crossed this valley back and forth many times between Jerusalem and Bethany. And the valley contains the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus prayed the night before he was crucified. And many, many Christians believe that Jesus will one day return to earth, to the Mount of Olives, and walk through this very valley and into the gates of Jerusalem. The most important Jewish cemetery from the First Temple period, going way back, is here. And you can see rock-cut tombs that were created between the 9th and 7th centuries BCE. On the eastern side of the valley, you have three really important tombs. You have the tomb of Absalom, and you have the tomb of Ben-Hazir, and you have the tomb of Zechariah. Let me give you a little bit of story. One night I decided I would explore and go through the bottom of the valley and up to the Mount of Olives in the dark, which I guess was a bad idea. The sun was just going down as I went around the back of the old city on this road that was kind of shady, kind of sketchy, kind of had trash on it and everything. And I continued to the bottom of the valley, which, by the way, has this very special feeling. It's hard to define, but you can feel the history. Continued up the other side, and you could hear hoots and hollers of kids, youths, running around amongst the gravestones. And it was pretty eerie. Made my way up to the Mount of Olives, and there was a hotel up there. And I figured I'd call a cab to come back, and no cabs would come and get me up there. So I was kind of on my own. After a few attempts at getting a cab to come up there and failing, I realized that maybe coming up there on my own was a bad idea. Now back to the old city. If you're a person who is uncomfortable with assault weapons, actual military-grade assault weapons in public places, then you may be uncomfortable in the old city of Jerusalem, because depending on what's going on, you may see a lot of them, as you can see here in the video. If you are interested in weapons, you may be interested in the Tavor TAR-21, which you might see in the old city. It's an Israeli bullpup assault rifle. It fires a 5.56 NATO round. It has a selective fire system, either semi-automatic or fully automatic. I stayed a couple days up in northern Israel, and my host took me to a blacksmith lesson. He was going to go to a blacksmith lesson. He said, "Do you want to go?" I said, "Yes, I made this nail." Making a nail is very difficult. I'm lucky I didn't crush my hand with that big heavy hammer. And we took a tour up north, around by the Lebanese border and over by the Syrian border. And what you're seeing right here is actually a Hezbollah guard compound and tower. We got pretty close to that. And that was a reality check right there. This is the Syrian border. I had a microphone with me and did a little report. Here it is.
The Syrian border is right there in front of you at that tree line. Right there is a UN base, and then a border point just to the left of it. And as I swing around, there's the town of Quneitra in Syria, where there is fighting right now. If I stayed here long enough, you might hear a mortar round, but the fighting is going on right there, right now. Over to the left, you see a gray wall. I don't know if you can see it because of the weather, but that's the Syrian border. As I turn around, there's a thing called a tel. This is Ben Tel, and what it is a volcano crater. You can't see it because it's shrouded in clouds, but this is a strategic point, one of a number of them for the Israelis. There's lots of high-tech telemetry and information gathering stuff in
Hopefully this gives you an idea of what a very different reality and lifestyle people who live in northern Israel have. Let me just give you a few random images before I wrap things up. Here we have a Bedouin encampment that I encountered on the way from Jerusalem to the Dead Sea. There's the Dead Sea, hot and salty. And as you may have heard, when you swim in the Dead Sea, you bob around like a cork. That's me. Masada is famous for being the refuge of the last survivors of Jewish revolt. And here's an angry sea, an angry Mediterranean Sea from Akko up north. If you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing and click on the bell to get notified of future posts, future travel videos. And remember to travel lightly, my friends. Travel lightly.